Good gracious. Okay, cool. We did it.
We did it. Good on you. Very good.
How are you doing over there?
Good. Yes. As I said,
Good.
we've had a thunderstorm for the past hour, and I was going, just now go away, please, because like the dogs were barking and everything. It was like, no, not now. But yeah, we're good. We're good. It's a nice time of year now. It's spring in Bolton, and yeah, it's
Oh,
a good
good.
time. Yeah.
How's it? How's all the? I know you just did a Reiki training and stuff too. How did that go?
It was good. Yeah. And a really interesting group. I always find, the group's dynamic is just really interesting to me. So it was great. Lots of questions, which I love.
Oh,
Yeah. It was
sweet.
good.
Yeah.
Really interactive. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really growing. Like I've noticed you have like a lot more interaction on your page and stuff, like a lot more people. I send everybody to you for Soul's Journey Home too. Like, go take
thank
that
you.
course.
I know. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of interest as well. I did I don't know whether you know Sharon Blackie, If Woman
Yeah,
Knows
yeah.
Rooted, that book.
Yeah.
But she's doing a Hagitude program, so I was one of the guest speakers on that. So there was a lot of interest actually out of that. So there's people sort of waiting to do it this year, which is good.
Oh, yeah. That's one of my
Right.
most favorite courses I've ever taken. I even have
Wow.
like my my skull here.
Here's my mug, if you can see it.
My husband's always like, can you put that away when guests come? He's like,
I
it's kind of
forget.
creepy.
I have two big life-size ones, and I've actually got a new, bigger life-size one. But I forget that they're out, and like people come in, and it's like, oops.
Well, my whole bookcase is like, like preparing to die, or like the Celtic Book of Dying, or like I was like, I swear it's not like a morbid thing. Like I'm not weirdly into people dying. Like
Yes.
it's just one of those things. Yeah. So funny. Ever since that course has been, it's like I tell everybody about it. I'm like, go take it; it'll change your life. Yeah. It's really one
it's
of the best.
amazing though. It is. It's amazing.
And how it translates to the birth world too.
Absolutely.
I mean, I use so much of what I learned in your course because I free birthed my daughter in an Airbnb.
Oh wow.
We moved from Japan. We didn't have a house yet, and we didn't have any of our things. And I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? I don't want to give birth in a hotel room, because that seems like icky.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, we'll find an Airbnb that's furnished. I obviously won't ask the host if I can give birth in her house. I'll just make sure I clean up. And then I gave birth.
You arrive with a bump and leave with a baby. Like, she never have known.
Well, my husband said he was surprised nobody called the cops because I was like really loud, as I was just making all the sounds, move through the sensations. And he's like, I'm surprised nobody came over to check to see if I was like murdering you. But I was like, it was the only thing I could do. That's the only thing that, was available to me at the time. So yeah, I used a lot of like what I knew about death, because there's so much unknown giving birth. And then like releasing into that, it made it a very powerful experience. Now my daughter and I have a really close connection because of all of that. There's not like that fear of, oh my God, will I die? Will she die? It was just like, what happens will happen. Just as if I was in the hospital,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's that, I mean, the beautiful, the mirroring of that transition, even from the waves of contraction and that sort of like energetically, what's happening in those moments. It's just, it's beautiful. Yeah. That's amazing.
And that meditation that you have in the course where you get used to like leaving your body and coming back. It's also really helpful to know when I'm in my body and when I'm not in my body.
Right. Wow.
I didn't want to abandon my body during the birth of my daughter because of the sensations. And a lot of us, learn to abandon our bodies when we feel any type of uncomfortable, especially pain.
Discomfort. Yes.
I would call it. It was definitely pain for a little while, but it's a short amount of time. So I was definitely checking in, like, am I in my body right now? Did I escape somehow?
Wow. Wow. Amazing. Well
it's
done.
Really cool.
Well
I don't remember how long ago I took the course. It must have been like at least 2 years.
That's what I was trying to think. It must be 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
even trying to think, because it wasn't last year, but I was wondering, was it the year before or was it even the one before that again? I can't remember.
I think it must have been about 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When did you start Soul's Journey Home?
You see, I'd been doing it residential
Mm,
from probably 2015, maybe, or in and around that time.
mm.
But then when COVID hit, it was, yeah, that's when I went and brought it online. And that was interesting because that was that whole, for me, will the energy translate was sort of my worry about the work. Yeah, and I have to say it does, and it carries, and it's just, yeah, it's amazing and it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that sort of, the first group I did online, it just worked out so well. I've continued doing it online, even though now we're sort of finished COVID stuff, because again, you have a wider audience and people from abroad can join us. So it's
Yes.
lovely. Yeah.
Do you still have your labyrinth out in your fields?
No, the labyrinth has retired.
That's a lot of work. I was wondering if you were still out there doing all the work, because I love all the pictures you take with the dogs and the cats going out for your walks.
Yeah. Now, as I said, the big labyrinth has retired. It was an interesting journey because, I mean, yeah, it was something that was asked for from the land. As I say, I hadn't planned on building a labyrinth or creating a labyrinth, but it's something that the land wanted. And, for me, it was very significant. It wasn't one of the classical, maybe European labyrinths. It needed to be that our triple spiral, one of our Celtic symbols. And it was huge. Like, it was a massive, big labyrinth. But yeah, probably about 3 years ago, there was just this rumbling of let it go. And of course, I was going, no, I'm going to hang on to this because, I'm really attached to this labyrinth. And, it was just such a focal point here. And it was like, no, we're really, no, we're going to keep going with this labyrinth so much. And it just got harder and harder to, push against something that the land was there going, no, this is done. We're complete. This piece of it. And I always knew that would happen. Like, even creating the labyrinth, it was always, it was done in a way and sort of that impermanence that it could return to nature and to the wild when that time came. And of course, that's what happened. So yeah, I resisted for quite a while and kept persisting and trying to keep this labyrinth intact. And then I just went, look, enough. So I let it go. And there's dreaming of maybe being a pond down where the labyrinth used to be. So we'll see. We'll see if that is possible. We'll make that happen. And then I'm going to create a much smaller labyrinth in another area, but it'll be very, very different. I do want to sort of hold that symbol here. Yeah.
I love that. I was just talking with my husband about I'm having a chat with Moya, and he's like, oh, from the book that you were reading, and I was like, yeah. So we were chatting about finding our places, because we ended up in Utah, of all the places, from Japan to Utah, and we'd never lived on the West Coast. And I said, there's just something about the land calls you to where you need to be, even if it feels like you're not where you want to be. The land calls you there. There's a reason why we're here. And I love that, walking on the ground barefooted so that you can feel the earth and listen to the messages of what the earth is trying to tell you. And then again, like holding so tightly to the labyrinth because you love it, but then the land's like, no. So something that once gave you like all that energy and inspiration is now making it harder and harder for you to try to create it. Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
It is. And I mean, I think it's life, because it is that sort of cyclical nature of things that, and us as humans, we do our damnedest to go against that flow so often, that we do sort of, we do fight it rather than just go, okay, what actually is being asked of in this moment, and let's go with the easy flow. And from my work, like, I'm more into the soft, easy approach for everything. It's like, why not take the easier route? Right. I remember it was years ago, you'll laugh at this, but I was in some group and we were doing some meditation, and it was a mixed group. And I don't know, it was part of this meditation, like it was a visualization that was being guided. And we had to get through this wall, and the reflections afterwards, because there was so many people there, and particularly the men in the group, like they were bashing down this wall and trying to climb over it. And then they sort of looked at, because I was sitting there going, okay. What did you do, Moya? well, I just opened the door and walked through. And it
Right.
was like, what? And it was just the different approaches. But, I sort of, it mirrors what we tend to do in life. We do tend to look for the harder route and the more difficult route. And it's like, okay, can we find that door that would make it a little bit easier that we just
But we think it has to be hard somehow, that it can't be
do?
easy, you know?
Uh-huh.
Like,
Yes.
I love that because I just reread your chapter in her book. I love that book as well. Like, Sharon, it's very, writes so well. It just really, it speaks to women. She speaks to us from us,
Yes.
she's not, it's not like a man
Absolutely.
telling you what your experience is.
Yeah.
And I love that you were saying, like the land was asking you for something. But if you had wanted it to be hard, you would have just mowed it all down and tried to make it as hard as you could, even though the labyrinth was physical work.
Yes.
And
it was, but I mean, it was just a routine as well. It sort of came part of like a weekly routine in summer. It wasn't for me, it wasn't a huge ordeal. Now the trimming of the walls, as we called it, was a sort of twice a year we had to gather the troops for that.
Right. But it becomes a
work.
thing to gather and like, it's like grooming yourself, like it takes a certain amount of care and attention that you need. And it's the same like with children in the land where you have to attend to it, but you can't project your own things onto it. You have to let it tell you and then try to work with it and move around it. Just like walking barefooted. You can't, especially out here out west. I have a bunch of thistle growing out here, and you have to be really careful when you're barefoot because it'll let you know like you stepped off the path.
But I think that's the piece, it's the relationship piece that I think in our modern society we tend to be missing with land, like with earth that we live on. We've somehow become very disconnected with it, so we don't even feel that relationship anymore. And if we think of it even in very basic terms, like we're here on earth, the earth that sustains us, that feeds us, that shelters us, that nourishes us. How could we not have a relationship with it? And then in that relationship, there's the equality piece and the give and the take and the listening and the speaking, and there's all of that, and happens with the land and with the trees and with all of those things around us, as it's interesting, we've forgotten almost how to relate with the land, that we can listen to the messages and hear the voice of the land too.
And let it be wild. It is like a mother-child dynamic where 1 minute I'm the mother and the earth is the child, and then we switch. It's like a very reciprocal relationship of letting it. It doesn't always need to be tamed. We don't need to kill all the weeds. We don't need to, constantly have it manicured, It's just listening
in essence, I think, the day of weeding needs to be gone. I know it's not in a lot of areas, but it's gradually changing. Because we are killing the earth by taming it. And I sort of say, my neat gene is dissolving because we all grew up in families that mowed the lawns and kept everything weeded and neat and tidy, but it's like, it depends for is it life or neatness, it boils down to like hard facts. And I don't know, you probably know of Mary Reynolds and the We Are the Ark movement.
Yes.
So that's a lovely movement, just with lots of information for people who do want to maybe let things go a little bit wilder, and how we can do that even in very small areas, and why we would do it, to support our native flora and fauna, so that, even the likes of the bees and the insects that pollinate our food, can sustain and maintain. So important.
And we are learning constantly. So it's not like, well, you're doing the wrong thing. It's just, you just don't know sometimes. And then later, a lot of women I find out that they really love, looking and finding herbs that you can eat and bring home and, make into tinctures and teas. And then you start to have a relationship with those, and then you find more, and then it turns into a bigger world opens up to you, because you start to realize like, oh, well, maybe if we don't kill the dandelion, we could use the dandelion before it dies, or even speak to it you know,
Yes.
and have a conversation with its consciousness and be like, I'm having a hard time with my blood right now. Can you help me cleanse my liver?
Uh-huh.
And then have this beautiful relationship. And then it weaves into other relationships with humans as well.
Yeah.
When you really need help, you learn to ask for those things and it sounds so silly. Like my husband laughs at me all the time, but I was like, you're you're coming into it now. You're starting to realize that like everything has consciousness, and eventually
Yeah.
you're going to lean on those
Yeah.
to move through your next phase of life, because
Yeah.
it's
Absolutely. And I think when you start having that relationship, like for me, I'm always curious, like if things appear that were never here before, and it's
yeah.
like little gifts almost from the earth. And then when you start like, okay, who are you? And what are you, you know, for, and your energy, and what's that all about? And it's really interesting because it's like almost at the very moment that you need something, it just miraculously appears,
hmm
which is beautiful. It's beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's interesting to ask the land, like, why am I here? Who called me here? You know, what kind of a I don't remember any of my ancestors living on the West Coast. I've only heard about, you know, Scotland and then the East Coast. That's
Right.
where everybody's just kind of
Okay.
gathered. So I was like, why am I here? So it's fun to just
Yeah.
look for all the signs, or just be
Yes.
aware when I'm walking, you know, what animals are making eye contact or fluttering past me, and what plants I'm discovering. So it's
Yeah.
definitely um it's like a new life is being born out of this land for me. I'm very
Yeah.
different than I was 2 years ago. Um, and the
Yeah.
land is just teaching me how to be a new person, a
Yes.
new woman. Yeah.
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 It's that life and death is constantly happening, and it's easier and
Yes.
easier to let go. And I
Yeah.
don't want to plug your course too much, but I learned about what I thought of my mortality, and you know, actually thought about it without being scared or worried that I might die someday. You know, like I got to hurry
Yeah.
up and get everything in, but it's just a new day is always something. It's like a gift, like you
Yes.
said, and it's
Yeah.
it's it's like a weight off your shoulders.
It is. And I think for me, that has been the biggest gift, you know, with doing this work and just with embracing death. Because it just, and just by its very nature, you know, it is a way of honing the important stuff in life and getting rid of all the trivial stuff out of life. And it's then suddenly you go, okay, you know, that question that I asked, like, if this was my last day on earth, you know, how do I want to spend it? How do I want to be? Who do I want to be with? What do I want to be doing? And that's the important stuff in life. You know, that's
Right.
the big stuff, you know, the real stuff. Um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. If I don't remember, I think you talked a little bit that you used to be in palliative care, but how did you get into creating Soul's Journey Home and things like that?
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's a bit of a backstory, I suppose. I mean, probably from my university days, I did a degree
Mm.
in sociology and social policy. And right from then, I suppose growing up, even I had a comfort with death, and I didn't know where that came from, and I couldn't have explained it back then. You know, now I've glimpses of different things. You know, I've spoken before about a near drowning, that at the time probably didn't mean a whole lot to me, but it was one of those bigger consciousness sort of experiences when you've sort of left your body and you've left the fight and everything's very peaceful. Um, so yeah, whether it was that gave me just a comfort around that letting go process, I don't know. But throughout sort of, I suppose, my teens and even into early 20s, I just had a comfort around death. And in university, I would have done stuff about death rites and death rituals and stuff like that. Um, and then I went into nursing. And again, in nursing, I sort of pursued that. You know, I did courses with the hospice, you know, yeah, and various things. And in my nursing role, even in accident and emergency, would have been called on to be with families who've maybe had a loss. Um, and then in different jobs, because I worked in healthcare, I've worked in education, I worked as an employee assistance officer at one point, and we did provide sort of loss and bereavement support.
Mm.
But sort of along that way, I was getting into meditation and getting into my complementary therapies, and sort of, yeah, that was growing sort of within me, you know, because I thought in our medical system, we were very much treating symptoms, you know, that we weren't looking at maybe the whole of the being and sort of more root causes of illness. And, you know, the complementary field allows us, you know, in combination with medicine to access that. And then I had set up my practice in Meath, where I used to live, and our local palliative care team are referring patients to me privately. And I'd always wanted to work in palliative care, but I wanted to work complementary therapies in palliative care. And at the time, that role just didn't exist. It wasn't there. You know, it wasn't the hospices. And then there was one other nurse who had sort of started in another region. So then the team that I had been working with privately asked me, would I go in and set up a service with them? You know, it was meant to be sort of a short-term thing, sort of 6 months. And yeah, 7 years later, I was still there, you know. Yeah, so that was, and you know, in palliative care, which is a big multidisciplinary team, like a consultant-led team with physios and occupational therapists and social workers and nurses, and you know, a big team. And I was the nurse in complementary therapy within that. So yeah, my role was to use complementary therapies with our clients. Yeah, so that was my foray into palliative care, and then I left.
What do you think made you leave? Like, because I hear a lot of parallels in your story to people talking about birth work as well, like being midwives, but being traditional midwives. So not like in the medical system, but being women supporting women. So I like hear a lot of parallels with it. I'm assuming it was the medical system just started to be a little more restraining.
It is. And I think, you know, a number of jobs I've left over the years, it's all been organizational and structures. Like, I loved my work and I loved the people I worked with, my colleagues. I loved, you know, palliative care, I think, is just such an honor to be allowed to be with those people as they're doing that journey. But yeah, it's structures, and I felt, you know, it's that suffocating sort of sensation that, you know, we're losing our humanity, even, you know, with our colleagues, but with our clients as well, that there's so much restrictions. And yeah, that I couldn't be the way I suppose I wanted to be, and be all that I wanted and needed to be in terms of even the help and support that I'm offering. So yeah, an opportunity. And I suppose that was, I'm thinking back, like, I was in the middle of a recession where I put my house on the market and sort of started looking across the country. You know, I worked my way over from Meath, realistically. So yeah, I came to here and I just knew, okay, this is, and I was moving to an area, like, I didn't know anyone. I have no relatives here. I have no community here. I have none of that here. So I was really sort of, relocating in the big term. So yeah, I landed here in my little patch of land, an old cottage on 4 acres. So yeah, that's how the move came. And then, you know, my palliative care colleagues, it was actually them that prompted the Soul's Journey homework. They had been doing other courses, you know, really good courses, but sort of probably heavily theoretical, and in large groups. And, you know, they came to me with a very specific request. We want more. We want sort of like a spiritual vein. How do we be with a person as they're taking this journey? And, you know, how do we support them, but also support ourselves? So very much the spiritual aspect and the self-care aspect, and, you know, what's going on for the person beyond the medical, and even the, you know, the physical and emotional side of things, like what else? So they had asked for that. So, and it was a residential program. So over sort of we met on Friday and worked through till Sunday. And brilliant. I mean, even from the first program, it was like, wow, I was blown away. You know, it went way beyond anything I could have imagined or expected, or and that first bunch of people, like, you know, they were sort of, you know, blown away as well, because that piece that we didn't realize, any of us, even I hadn't realized the impact that looking at death and embracing death would have on actually our living choices. So it went way beyond even how we be a support to someone who's leaving this world, to what am I doing in my own life, and why am I doing this thing, and I need to change how I'm living. So that was big for the majority of people that, you know, we were there. And it grew out of there. There was probably maybe three or four residential, and then it went online at COVID. So yeah, that's where it came from. And it has evolved even, you know, it was quite structured, even though we were together, and I don't do structured work. Like, we go with the energy of the group, even if that's needed in the moment. But there was still, it was, yeah, it would have been probably more focused on the accompanying and the companioning side of things. Whereas now we're very much looking at our own, experience often with death. And those key things, as you know, that I'm very strong. Well, like, presence for me is the big one. You know, the biggest gift we can give anyone, whether it be in their living or dying, is our full presence. And I mean that absolutely unconditional, authentic presence with no agenda, no judgment, just, I am here, but, you know, what do you need? How can I help? And then that moving piece that comes along with when we're talking about energy moving and leaving and moving on.
Yeah.
And so that's
I mean,
where
I
it
really feel like
starts.
death, like, has come through you to spread the message. Like, you don't realize it at the beginning of the course, because you're like, oh, death, this seems like very confronting. I'm not quite sure. But even since, like, working with you, even in my own life and my own work, it's like death comes through me a lot. Like, I talk a lot about death, and not about the morbid type of death, like you should prepare yourself to die, but just death is always, I can always kind of feel her around, almost like a cloak that comes around me every once in a while, and I feel lit up when I talk about it, and or talk about her. And especially, you know, when you first started the work, like you said, was just supporting someone else, but then realizing that, like, all of us can kind of elevate our consciousness and our presence by accepting death, because you learn that it's just source, you know. It's just
absolutely.
and just that expansion, like that meditation that you have where you talk about expanding, so you're just expanding your consciousness out, is something I still use to this day.
Beautiful.
Because to bring in and to kind of, you know, like, spread the message that needs to be spread. And I can see that, like, definitely in your work, and has been in your work for a long time. So I was just curious, like, how you kind of started exploring more. Did you explore through books or your own meditation, or, like you said, maybe you're near drowning, she's just kind of like been around and you just got to know her? But how have you gotten closer with her?
I think, I mean, you know, looking back, like, I would never have seen that as a significant moment until my, you know, adult years. But looking back, obviously it was significant. You know, we could go even further back. My great grandfather was a undertaker in Mayo, and had the first motorized hearse, was the claim to fame, you know. First motorized hearse in Mayo. But yeah, I think subconsciously death has been working with me for years, you know, unbeknownst to myself. Because, as I said, even in university, and I went to university straight from school, I was doing the death research and some of that, you know, the death rituals, and we were doing sort of the Irish folklore stuff. So I was dabbling away with that. And even then in my nursing days, like, that was extracurricular stuff I was doing with the hospice. Cool. Around loss and bereavement, you know, it wouldn't have been part of our nursing even. But again, I didn't, you know, I was being led sort of unconsciously at that time, I think, personally. And then for me, I always follow the, you know, I ask even in work, like, people who are business minded roll their eyes at me, because I don't have a business plan. I don't lay out, I'm doing this, 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 and this. It's when the ask comes, that's when I respond. So if someone starts, or a couple of people start asking for something, it's like, Moya, now listen, this has obviously been asked of. And then there's the want and the need for that. And that's where that first ask came. And then, you know, you have to immerse yourself in that, because when you're facilitating a group like that, that's when the big work starts. So I would have done a lot of work sort of in the lead up, probably for about a year, even before that, 6 months to a year, you know, with my own journey. And that's where the, you know, I journey in that cave of Kesh that I shared with you, you know, that it really was a deep dive into death. And it was, you know, for me, death is an energy and is palpable as an energy. And it is inviting death into your life in every single moment, you know. So it's like you open the door and it's like, yes, death, come in and be with me. And it's, you know, the smaller deaths that you experience continuously, you know, be it the letting goes or the closures, but also, you know, the dying creatures or the wildlife that's death and decay, and, you know, being with that soul and letting them show you and teach you what happens at that moment of death and where do we go. And, you know, the animals are great teachers in that. For me, you know, I always remember, like, way back, one big spirit horse, as I sort of called him back then, but you know, he was going to be put to sleep like a couple of days after I was with him, and it was like, is it time to go back? That was the question that was asked of me, you know. And weeping, I'm there going, God, how beautiful is that? And if only us humans could look at it as that, is it time to go back?
Right.
So there was moments like that, but then, you know, for me as well, working in the groups, like those residential programs, because there was, you know, you did the mask with us, that we create that mask of death, but in the residential we danced with death. So
I
we
love
were
that.
in darkness in a room, you know, with very loud music and big music. And you can feel, you know, I sort of feel and sense energy, but okay, we have to go further and more. And then it was like death, you know, come into me, and it was like all of a sudden I'm death in this room. And those moments as well are hugely informative in how we can be with energy and how we relate to energy and what we can learn from that energy. Yeah, and it's, but you know, I say with every group that I facilitate, and you know, for me it's co-facilitating, because I'm learning and journeying with death in every single moment, in every single group, you know, because it's always different and each year is different. According to the material, you know, even different things in those run-ups, the months before is like, okay, Maria, there's a new topic that's coming in, you know, why we have to look at this year, you know. So yeah, and then the groups, like the groups are fantastic, as you know, like people from all over the world with varying views of death. And I love that, because it's like with all of our cultures, like we all have so much wisdom and knowledge. Maybe we
Yes.
don't always know it, but we have it. And when we can then tap and start, you know, tapping into that and sharing that in that bigger group, it's wonderful. It's amazing. Yeah. But it's an ongoing, it's, you know, for me, it's not one thing. Yeah, or one thing that I did that allows me to do this work, or, you know, it's a culmination of so many different things and an ongoing process. You know, it's not finished, it's not stopped, it
Yeah.
continues. And you know that from your own work with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. After your course, of course, I say, of course, my husband had someone in his family pass away in Dominican Republic, and we're in Japan. So we weren't able it was during COVID as well, so we weren't able to travel. And he came to me. Yeah, I was doing a meditation and he came to me, and funny enough, a lot of the things that come to me are when I'm in the bathroom, like that quiet in the morning. You know, when you have to, that one pee, you have to get up and go, and it's still kind of dark, but it's almost time for you to get up. All the messages come to me when I'm in the loo, as my friend Ruby says,
In the loo.
in the loo, and it sounds better. And he was telling me I'm not ready to leave my body yet, and he told me a couple different messages, and he wanted me to tell my husband. And so I said, you know, this is going to sound crazy. So take it for what it is. If you don't care about what I'm saying, then just let me know to give you space, or we can investigate more. And a lot of the things that he told me were things that he had never told me. I didn't know this man. I didn't even know this man had a strong connection with my husband. And we ended up doing a whole death rites. We made it up as we went. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not qualified to do this. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, nobody's taught me how to do this. So we were just kind of going with the flow. He loved a certain type of donut. There was a river that I visited quite frequently when we were there. I buried my daughter that I had early there. And we just had this ceremony where my husband sat on a rock and drank a beer with his uncle so that he could leave his body. And then I helped usher his uncle's consciousness over the proverbial bridge to be received by his ancestors on the other side. And so that's been happening little by little as I embrace death more and more, as these beings are coming to me and saying, you know, I'm not ready to leave my body, or I'm not sure if I should leave my body. And then I've kind of traveled to their body and performed their death rites so that they would feel comfortable leaving their body or staying with their body while they venture out. And it's really, really special. And it's such an honor to be with an actual physical body, because it's ready to rest, and it's done such a great job holding that consciousness for so long that having someone teach you how to do it is kind of, you know, makes my skin crawl now. But at the time I was thinking, this is crazy. Like, how would you, like, what do you even do? I was telling my husband, I don't have all the things. I don't have the books for this. Nobody's taught me how to do this. I'm not certified to do this, like certified. But, you know, through my own discovery of what death means to me, or what I would want if I were to pass away, has opened up so much more. And she's taught me so much about myself and who I'm being in every moment, and what kind of presence I'm bringing around my children and around my husband, or just being on the earth here, you know, who I'm attracting to me. And that feeling of belonging. Stephen Jenkinson writes about this a lot. He's another person that I love to hear him speak on death. He's so eloquent. We always feel like we don't belong somewhere. Like we don't have a place to belong. When really the belonging is, you know, feeling our connection to source. And I love that the work that you help spread out in the world has then turned into the work that I'm starting to do, or that anybody in my, you know, course, they're doing a lot of work in death as well. And it's opening to the younger generations now, where they don't wait until right before they get that call that maybe they have cancer or their mom has cancer. They're just starting to learn for themselves. And I think that's really cool, because we're not taking someone else's ideas and trying to make it our own. You know, we're creating our own death rites and our own ways of dying, and our own ideas of how we would bury our beloved pet. And we don't need anybody to teach us that. And that's really,
and I think it is, and it's so important, you know, and for me, and you know, the way sort of that I pass on information and teach, if you want to call it that, but it's about finding our way. You know, it's not, you know, for me, it's that self-inquiry piece. It's about, you know, looking at all that you've spoken about in that sort of safe, contained environment, and then being able to access that when we need it. And it's beautiful what you've said there, because how wonderful is that? And it's your presence in those moments that allows you to see what is needed and what is wanted from the person that's leaving in those moments. And that's our big gift. And that isn't something that can be taught, because it's so individual. Like I always said that even to my colleagues, you know, when I was working in palliative care, it was like, you know, it can't just be one way and there's this sort of checklist.
Right.
This and this. Okay, well, yeah, we've done all that. We've covered all that. It's like, no, actually, wait a wee minute. Because oftentimes there's those curveballs, as I call them, or the tangents that often happen. And it's like, okay. And even, you know, and we spoke a wee bit about ritual as well on, you know, when we're doing the soul's journey work. But for me, a ritual even has to be a living, breathing entity. Because in any moment within that ritual or rite, whatever we're doing, something may be presented that is asked for or needed of. And it's like, am I going to stay with my script?
Right.
Okay, I have this, and this to do, or am I actually going to, okay, the energy is asking or something, or the person that's leaving is asking something different. Right. And have we that, you know, the courage to, okay, let's go with this. Let's do what we need to do in that moment. And for me, they're the really important things. And I just love hearing you speaking about that and being I was going to say being that in that moment. It's not about doing, It's about being in that moment and being whatever is needed in that moment.
Well, that's so cool that I've discovered that about myself, because we're so institutionalized to think that we need to learn it from someone, and this is for so and so, but not for you. And there are a lot of people out there, spiritual people out there, teaching these things, and this is the way you have to do it. And if you didn't buy my whole product line, then you can't do this.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I talk about, like, I love building earth altars for people, especially on their birthdays, because it's a very like sensitive time of you turning another age.
Yes.
And there's a lot of, your ancestors are coming in, and there's a lot of energies, and creating something that can biodegrade, obviously, with flowers, which I never liked flowers before, because I thought it was a waste of money. They're just gonna die, why buy flowers? They're just gonna die. And then, I was smacked with a realization that, this is the perfect way to use them. Yes. And then just making whatever shapes come to mind and come through. And it's almost like a meditation, creating these things. And my husband's like, you should teach this. And again, at the time I was like, no, nobody taught me how to do this. I don't know. I'm just kind of going with it, just making it up. But that's exactly what it's supposed to be, is a ritual and a ceremony are supposed to be from you. And then either you give it to someone, or you give it to yourself, or you give it to the earth. And it's just something you make up as you go. And if it feels good, you go with it. And if it doesn't, then you don't. But you don't need anything. You could do a ritual without anything in front of you. Absolutely. And that's the really awesome piece about us being here in a body, is that, we're consciousness experiencing form. So just going and touching the dirt could be a ritual.
Absolutely.
And that nobody has to tell you, or you don't have to buy anything. It's just, yeah.
I think that, there's an important piece, I suppose, in there, that we're respectful, even in the rituals we do, and that it's ingrained in you, it's an innate thing. Mm-hmm. But I think that's why, some people, there's a lot of fear maybe around ritual, or there's, a lack of experience or knowledge. And then that more rote form of ritual can be useful for people to actually allow them to do something rather than to do nothing. So there is value in it in another way, in a strange way. But for me, it's it's when we start experiencing things for ourselves that it becomes alive, that it becomes, it's that, co-merging with energy and actually becoming the energy, becoming the spirit of the ritual, from our human bodies. That's when the real magic happens. But we always do it in that very humble, respectful way. There's no arrogance or ego. It's not about control or performance. It's and exactly what I'm talking about. But it's, I think they're the containers that are sort of needed around doing it in maybe that more free, fluid way. We have to be connected with ourselves, so that we do know and hear the yeses and nos and what's okay and what's not. It's very interesting.
It is. I've heard a lot of people get nervous about starting rituals, or even when I describe, like someone's pet has passed away, and my friend Bex always tells me, I'm working with someone that their dog is passing away, or she just had to put her dog down, and she just wants you to check on him really quick. So sometimes we'll just take this space to feel into the energy, and sometimes I show up and they've already left their body, and I just kind of wrap their body in light. It's a whole like washing ritual that I've kind of come down. I've got it down, and usually I have to, do you want me to clean you? Yes. And then I wrap them in light, and then I hold them for a while. And sometimes they have messages for their owners. I forgot where I was going with that. So with the rituals and things, it's a very fluid thing, but some days I'm like, no, I shouldn't open up to that. I'm grumpy today, or or I have to move through this grumpiness first, and then bring myself back when I'm ready. And a lot of people get nervous of, I'm going to call in demons or whatever. And it's like, well, especially women who are very in touch with, and that's the audience I speak to mostly, are women, because I can't speak for the male experience. but that we are all very magical, very connected beings.
Yeah.
So we have to be aware of where we're at, and then we won't bring in that bad energy. But it's not necessarily something that's going to possess you or anything like that. It's just, why open up to another consciousness who's asking for help when you are in that? It's almost like your feet are in the mud.
Yes.
But you're not going to call in demons by
No,
doing
you're not.
ritual or speaking to
And
your
it's even, it probably came up at the weekend when I was teaching Reiki, that whole aspect of, if I'm not feeling well in myself, that isn't a time for me to be, particularly even with my animal work, like even connecting with animals, because I need to be in that very grounded, centered, clear space. And if I'm not there, I shouldn't be doing it. It's sort of the bottom line on a whole self-care level as well, but also out of respect and honor of the animal or spirit or the person that you're going to be with. You want to be the best you that's sort of showing up. And the other thing we spoke of, because it always comes up when you're talking about energy healing, is that aspect of, and I don't like negatives, or I don't believe in negative energy. There's just different frequencies of energy. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are denser, more heavy forms of energy, but it's not negative or positive. It just is energy. And that energy may need something of us in that moment too. So, but it always comes up about the protection piece. And for me, that protection piece is fear-based. Mm-hmm. What are we protecting ourselves from? And again, I sort of say, if we're throwing up protection in our work, we shouldn't be doing that work. We just shouldn't be doing it. And for me, I like to speak more about boundaries. That we're very clear. This is who I am. This is what I have to offer. This is as much as you can take. And that's it. End of contract. So that we're very clear, even in our energy work, that there's boundaries. And there'll be moments, even within sessions with me, I find myself sort of sitting up and going, no. Mm-hmm. Oh, not on my watch. We're not accessing that energy at the moment. Or yes, come and see what we want to do, but it's there's a give and take in it, that we have control over how we interact with energy as well. So like you're saying, it's not something that's going to come in and possess us, or
that's that a lot, especially creating like an altar, which I don't always have a running altar. It's usually certain times it'll spark, like, oh, I'll create an altar around like Samhain or around a birthday time, or around a certain, if I find some flowers, and I'll put some crystals around it, and it'll slowly become an altar, but it's not with the intention of creating one. And a lot of people talk about closing your altar because you might pull in bad energies or whatever. And I was like, well, if you're living from a place of fear, you're going to constantly bring in those really dense energies that make you feel scared or nervous. So if you're just kind of like open to and free flowing and aware of what's coming in, then you can let it pass out quickly. It's just, my friend always says, it's like everything's like a wave. So sometimes you need to be washed up onto shore. You might get banged up on the way, but then it'll pull you back out the ocean where you're cleaned, and then you'll come back in, and it'll just keep flowing back and forth. And something I really love, my friend Ruby, if we had plans and she wasn't feeling well, or she just didn't feel like she was in her body, or she was in a bad mood, she would say, oh, okay, I have to cancel the plans today. I'm just not feeling myself today, or whatever. And I'd never had a relationship with a woman who could say what she meant, instead of making up an excuse like, I have a doctor's appointment or whatever. And it's brings a lot more presence to a relationship to be like that, to say, not today, just not, I don't feel like interacting with anyone today, and that's just how it is, and not to feel offended personally. And I think as we have a hard time using those boundaries, because the selling of boundaries has become such a thing now in like spiritual wokeism. It's like, create that boundary. Like, well, no, it's where it's not to keep somebody out. It's just to say, I would like to conserve my own energy. Like, thank you for considering me, but it's not to block people. It's just to recalibrate, or to make sure that you're staying grounded in who you are.
Yeah.
You're not giving too much away in the name
Yes.
of
Yeah.
being a good girl or a nice
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
So I always love that idea of like just speaking your truth, if you will, like
Yes.
being honest in the moment
Absolutely.
about what you can
Yeah.
give, what you can't give, or you don't want to
Yeah.
give.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, because we spoke about this as well at the weekend, you know, those boundaries, and I don't speak about boundaries in terms of the walls because, you know, for me, it's not that. And it's, my train of thought now is like if we're creating those boundaries, as I've said before, where we're creating the protection or the blocking out, and to do the work that I want to do, I actually, you know, I'm a clairsentient, so to sense into another energy or another person or an animal, I actually have to be wide open and be willing to feel
Mm-hmm.
whatever energy shows up, in whatever guise, but I don't have the attachment to it. Like I would never look at an energy that appears as something even negative. It's like, oh gosh, you're maybe heavier, you're a bit harsher than I'd sort of be wanting or used to. But it's then like, okay, well, how can we soften that energy? Like that's my
Right.
sort of question with it. Like, what do you need of me? Like you're here for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever energy shows up. And it's like, how can we help? Or if that energy is causing trouble for another being, okay, how can we lessen or ease that energy? Do you know that it maybe softens a little bit or transmutes a little bit or, you
Mm.
know, becomes a little bit easier to be with. And that then is that presence piece again and the unconditional loving.
Mm.
Yeah, holding it in gentle, kind hands as opposed to the swords that is cutting that energy away. Like to me, that makes no sense. You
So
know, it's like, where does that energy go when you cut it and shove it away? Do you know, it's like that
yeah,
makes no sense. Yeah. So it's a different way of, I suppose, you know, we're talking about the very same thing, but we're approaching it a very different way.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, especially when I start talking about death, is that's why I bring it up. Is that a lot of people talk about, like, what if we call in the demons or, whatever, and it's a really interesting conversation to have because a lot of people bring in, they were raised Catholic or raised,
Yeah,
Christian or whatever, so they're being taught that there are these bad things coming in.
yes,
And
yeah,
so it's a really interesting conversation to have when you start talking about death is like, well, what do you think? Because
yeah,
death is a punishment a lot of
yeah,
times
yeah,
over something that just happens to organic bodies, like our consciousness will
yeah,
eventually leave at some point. Um,
yes,
so that's something that when you say boundaries or understanding where your energy is coming from, how much are you pouring out of your cup at the time? And are you going to replenish that? Or are you going to continue trying to pour out of an empty cup? It's really important when
yeah,
we talk about energy work,
yeah,
because and knowing where that is, like knowing when your gas tank is almost empty, so
mm,
that you don't open yourself up again and give out more than
yeah,
than you could, because then
yeah,
you'll be laying in bed the next week or
yeah,
so.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And just
yeah,
to be able to do what we do, you know, it's we have
right.
to be in that very present, centered state. So if we're rattled in any way, we're not doing what we set out to do.
Right, right.
That makes sense. It does, yeah. It's yeah, it's a way of being. And I think, you know, it's putting sort of self-care sort of front and forward, which again, I think as women we have difficulty in because we're, you know, sort of yeah, labeled the carers and the nurturers, which, you know, in
Mhm.
general we are, but it's not to your own detriment, you know, that we do actually take a wee bit of space. I sometimes say, you know, the most compassionate thing to sometimes is a big fat no. You know,
Yes.
it's, you know, for both ourselves and for the other person. You know, it's like if we can't do what they're asking in that moment, you know, sometimes the kindest thing to say is no.
Yeah, I don't want you showing up feeling empty. That's gonna drag me down.
Yes.
So I'd
Yeah.
much rather have you full and me full, and then we'll have a great
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
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 Well,
And that's not to say, you know, sometimes people see that as quite selfish or that you're not willing to help. And it's not that either, because
right.
it's, you know, you're still willing to help, but you're very clear on what help you can give, and you do it in an offering way as opposed to, you know, even a directing sort of. Sometimes we show up to help, and you know, we expect the person to do X, Y, and Z, whereas that maybe isn't helping, you know, we're not trying to fix or cure, because that's disempowering that person. We're saying they're broken. Whereas if we're offering from that sort of free space with no attachment, of that unconditional offering of, this is what I can do, this is what I can offer in the moment,
Mm.
you know, please accept or take, but if you don't want to, don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because even creating the earth altars, it's a gift to the earth, but I'm not expecting anything in return.
Yeah.
Like I'm
Yeah.
not going to see anything tangible in return. I'm just not, the earth's not going to reach up and give me another bouquet of flowers.
Yeah.
It's that you're offering from a place of love, and
Yeah.
do with it as you will, because
Yes.
it's just like giving a gift to someone and they could take it and just dump it in the trash. Like
Yeah.
I don't care
Yeah.
what you do with it once I give it to you. It's for
Yes.
you to have, and that's, you know,
Yeah.
that's what it is.
It
And a lot
is.
of times we get into the self-sacrificing. A lot of
Yeah.
women have, we've seen our mothers be martyrs and not do
Yeah.
things that they love,
Yeah.
in order to care for us. And so then we become those mothers who,
Yeah.
are self-sacrificing and never do anything we enjoy
Yeah.
for the sake of family. And
Yeah.
that tends to carry over into death work as well, or even in birth work, where
Mm.
you just become so self-sacrificing that it's no longer an offering.
Yeah.
Which I love that word offering, because
Yeah.
you offer
It
it to
is.
either be taken or not taken.
Yeah. And
That's
no
what,
attachment to the outcome, you know, because I think
right.
that's another place that we can get caught in. And probably where a lot of maybe mothers get caught as well, even in their children, you know, they're living then maybe their dreams through their children,
Mm-hmm.
um, which can be detrimental too, to both parties. But that we offer, it's that unconditional, yeah, offering that, you know, and there's no attachment to the outcome. We don't have an expectation, and we you know, we don't take offense regardless of what outcome there is, that we're not attached to it, that we give freely. And it can be difficult to do, you know, it's fair enough when we're doing it on a professional level, but on a personal level, that can be difficult too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really important, because I think a lot of the, you know, where I sort of see and hear the you know, the maybe those holding a healing space feeling very drained, is when there is an attachment to outcomes,
Mm.
that we're looking for a particular thing or a resolution of a particular thing for someone, which may not always happen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of us women end up doing that at some point, where we pretend to be someone in order to make another person comfortable. And we
Yeah.
are the ultimate shapeshifters. I mean, even in
Yeah.
history, we've shapeshifted our whole lives to eventually we get to a point where we don't know really where the real Brittany is.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of conversations this past week, which is so perfect that I'm talking to you now. But I was just curious, like, how have you come to find like who you are as a woman, and to be comfortable
Yeah.
with who you are as a woman, opposed to, playing the games of being, the perfect wife or the perfect
Yeah.
mother or the perfect sister or the perfect daughter, all those games that we play leading up to
Yeah.
being who we are.
I know. Probably for me, I mean, my biggest thing was moving here and living on the land. You know, I'm here 10 years now. Um, and that really, I know, you know, it was a conscious stepping out of roles and community, and, you know, some would say quite drastically so, but in a way, it was probably the only way that I was going to find myself. Um, and it was that daily walking the land here, and you know, as you're walking, you're walking with yourself, you know. And you know, I live alone, so I'm never lonely. People ask me that all the time, you're not lonely? And it's like, how could I be lonely? You know, there's just so much in this space. Yes, I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. But I think in that aloneness you can also then find yourself.
Mm.
um yeah, because you know, for me, and I suppose being clairsentient and sensitive, you know, it can be quite loud when you're with a lot of people, and there's, you know, those pulls of you all the time, and the asks and the requests of you. So living a quieter life has been very helpful for me, just to be more me.
Mm.
Yeah, to show up as more me. You know, and I know sort of, you know, I'm privileged in a way to be in a situation where I could do that. But then again, I sort of own that, because it's my life choices that you know, I could have gone down a very different path, but I've chosen this path for me in this incarnation, you know, that it's like, yeah, this is what I needed to do.
Mm.
And then as well, you know, there's that whole listening piece, the listening. I sort of say it is listening because, you know, if we're willing to listen and to listen to the hard stuff as well as the good, joyous stuff, and it comes in all sorts of formats, like it'll come from listening to yourself, listening to the other voice, listening to whatever, but also through our interactions with people. Do you know, there'll be, if we're really open and willing to listen, even if we don't in that very moment respond, you know, it's that felt sense of something that is worth exploring at a later date, because it's often there. You know, there's some conversations I've had that, you know, you get a physical, you know, kick in the stomach sort of, that's like, what was just said there? And, you know, even in the moment, you mightn't delve into it because it mightn't be appropriate or it mightn't be that sort of setting. But it's then, you know, that's where I do the self-reflection piece afterwards. Like, what was that about? And people, you know, we often get into, like, say if something was to annoy me, sometimes the automatic response is to look at the other person. What did they do to annoy me? And my ask is always, okay, what's not easy within me that caused me to have that reaction? Because in reality, if I'm very centered and present and still, regardless of what anyone says around me, that wouldn't have an impact on me unless there's something not at ease in me. So that's always, those sort of wee things are clues for me, or, you know, that piece, you know, I say as well, when we're looking at the soul's journey, if, you know, if I was to die today, you know, would I be okay with that? And I'm very lucky, sort of 90% of the time, 95%, I could say, yes, that'd be fine. But it's those days where I go, God, no, not now. That's when, okay, Moya, what's not at ease within you that you can't die right now? Do you know what needs resolution? So there are those wee things that I will do on a, you know, it's just part of the way that I live. It's like, it's a consistent self-reflective piece that, you know, on a day-to-day basis, you know, that you're always self-inquiring in a way, or self-reflecting. And people think that's very harsh, or maybe that you're, and I'm not talking about it in a harsh way. Like, it's not a chore. It probably would have been in the past. It's more, okay, for me, it's about energy. It's not even, you know, I sort of lost a personal attachment to it even. It's a, what energy was that, and what was it stirring up in me on an energetic term? And if I can look at things in energy, then we lose that attachment, or the, you know, the personal identity piece of it, that it's like, hey, what is this energy and what is needed from me in this moment? With
Or like
this,
pure curiosity, like animals, you know, like they're just curious.
Yes, absolutely.
They're not looking for a particular outcome or to punish themselves. They're just like, what's that smell over there? I'm gonna go smell it. You know, like, I'm just curious.
It's a way of inquiry, I suppose. Do you know, that you're just, and if we can do that, then we can learn, do you know, both about ourselves, but about the world around us. And for me, you know, I suppose being able to feel and sense energy is helpful, because, like, it informs me. And I can also then recognize it in energy terms, as opposed to, I often say to people, like, don't put the story on it. You know, we're great at, you know, if we feel this way, it must mean X, Y, or Z. Well, maybe not. You know, and again, we're great at creating the stories outside of ourselves, you know, that it's this person and this situation has created this within me. Whereas, like, well, maybe not. You know, it's what's going on for you that has caused that reaction from those external, you know, things. So it is, it's a curious, sort of interesting, way of being. I don't know whether that answers your question.
No, I hear that. It's, you know, it's so funny because my whole journey up to deciding to get pregnant again after miscarrying Ocean, and then making the radical choice to not see a doctor unless I felt like something was wrong. Or I wouldn't even say wrong, but there was something up that I couldn't, you know, figure out, that I needed outside help for. So it became a point of radical responsibility, which is like what I'm hearing from you is like radical responsibility. So when it's no one else's fault, you know, like
Yeah.
what, when we can't put a story on it, like, so I've made this decision and I've brought myself here. So now what are my choices? And my choices can either lead to this outcome, or maybe an outcome I can't foresee. You know, like there was no way of me knowing my baby was alive inside of me besides my knowing. If someone walked past me, or the baby moving, you know, if someone walked past me and said, "Is your baby alive?" I would say, "Oh, well, I'm pretty sure." But there's no way of knowing absolutely.
Yes.
So I take that radical responsibility of whatever was going to happen. And then so that's kind of carried into my womanhood now of like, it's no one else's fault for the way I'm feeling, you know? Like that's, and it's tough. It's very confronting. It's tough a lot of the time. Like, it's not something that's just easy, but I'm not looking for the easy way. I'm looking for the way that helps me be more me, you know? Like I don't want to be somebody else anymore. I've done that. I've played that game. And I noticed myself being different people around, you know, playing the jester around some people and being like, whoa, where did that come from? You know, why am I pretending to do the song and dance all of a sudden? You know, what is it about that relationship that makes me show up in that way?
Yes.
So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying when it comes to that. I think a lot of us are figuring that out. I think our energy is becoming less dense as well. I think a lot of us are starting to feel more into what the earth is saying and what our ancestors are trying to guide us towards, or the original people of the land we're living on, or the plants. We're starting to hear those messages a little bit more. So it's easier to integrate it into our beings and find out who we really are. But it's
and what a wonderful, rich life as well. Do you know, when you do, it's that knowingness that again has somehow got disconnected. That innate knowingness that probably, you know, our ancestors would have had because they didn't have all the external influences. Do you know that it's, there's a trust and a knowingness about things. And again, you know, we sort of lost that. So it's just lovely to hear you speak of that with your journey through pregnancy. It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Really important.
It's I would say the Death Course was the first one. The Soul's Journey Home was the first one. And then there's just so many parallels for women discovering, you know, or meeting death for the first time and integrating that into our lives, because we are the caretakers typically of our animals, of our parents, you know, when they get a little bit older and can no longer care for themselves, we tend to take on those roles just naturally. Even in our workplace, a lot of women tend to be the caretakers, the ones taking care of the food and all those things. So by pulling death into our lives, it's just, I mean, I know taking the course with you was like a game changer for me and our family. And so it was just such a gift to be able to live in more of a presence, and like you said, like we've been saying, the responsibility, because growing older is no longer the worry like it was before. You know, I just turned 30, and you see in the movies everybody cries when they turn 30, or you know, oh my god, I can't believe I'm this old now, or like women saying I don't want to be 30 or whatever. And I was like, whoa, I made it to 30. Like, how cool.
I've just turned 50, and that was my big, for my 50th, I wanted to celebrate, survive until I was 50, you know, for being here. I think it's just, aren't we just wonderful?
Like, how cool. Remember
how
being
cool
that
we've got it to 50 years.
Watching them or hear them say that they're 50, and you're like, wow, they're so old. Like, I'll never be that old. And then you turn that age and you're like, wow. Like, I turned that age. How cool. The 30 years I've been in a human body that's still walking around and moving. Like, how cool. So it's just been.
And it was interesting just on that piece of sort of finding yourself as a younger me, I could never see myself growing old. And I always, you know, I sort of imagined it that I had this sense that I would probably die young because I could never see an older version of myself. But since I've been here on the land, I now can see an older version hobbling around with her cane and poking at things, sort of being that feisty old woman up the lane. You know, it's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that's me. That's me
Yeah.
now.
Well,
And
it's
we're
hard when you
growing
have all
into that. It's like,
voices. Yeah, you get to grow into something. But when you have all the external voices telling you what you should be or how you should be, it's a lot harder to see yourself in that because
yeah,
we know we're not meant for that.
yes,
So that
yeah,
I love that you say, when you're on the land, you know more of who you are. And that's
yeah,
so true. Even walking barefoot out, we have this little path that everybody walks out there. But my
yes,
daughter and I walk with no shoes and we get
brilliant.
looks all the time because we don't own the land. We're just walking through it. But it's like we know who we're better people when we don't walk with
Yeah,
shoes on.
yeah,
And there was
yeah,
just this knowing this morning because I knew we were connecting where
yeah,
you have to walk delicately in a lot of places so you don't poke your feet and our feet are sensitive from wearing shoes all the time and
yeah,
it's just that's life. It's the perfect metaphor for life is walking barefoot. Some places you can walk sure-footedly and not look down and be totally cool, and other places you have to walk softly so you don't poke your feet on the
yes,
thistle, and you have to maneuver and pay attention, and we're really massaging the earth with our energies when we walk barefoot, and there's so much knowing that comes through doing that.
yeah.
And that, and like
I
you
would say
said,
that was the gift. It was the gift of the labyrinth as well, just very similar to that because, over the years, just even watching people walk it, and as I say, it was quite a large labyrinth. So you're sort of, am I there yet? You're still quite a long way to go. But in the labyrinth, like if you stopped and turned around, you get disorientated very easily. So people could end up back out without ever having made it into the center of the labyrinth. Or there was muddy areas that you could get stuck in. So sort of my question in that is like, okay, so when you get stuck, like what do you do?
right.
Do you push on? Do you sit in the mud and cry? Do you turn back? And likewise with that, when we get all turned around in life, like what do we do? So that was always, and it was always really interesting to see just different approaches to, yeah, how different people responded to that energy of, okay, what do we do now in this moment? And
Right.
like that, the field where the labyrinth was, it was, yeah, full of like thistles, brambles, reeds, before that labyrinth was made. So it was very harsh in those first few years, and we did it in our bare feet, but it was really hard underfoot. But what I loved is over the years, just from maintaining the pathways, it became just moss covered, and it was just so
Oh,
beautiful then. It was
yeah.
like after walking for years on the grass, it was like, now you can walk in comfort.
Yeah.
You've done the work, and now you can have a little bit of comfort and nicety and
Mm-hmm.
softy.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. Yeah, and it's about
Yeah.
looking at all those things and what wisdom that those experiences can have for ourselves and our beings.
Yeah. Like, who am I when I get poked in the foot? You know,
Yeah,
who am I when I go through the pain of childbirth? Who am I when, my pet passes away? Like, what kind of versions of me can all these things in life show me? Because a lot of times we'll
yeah,
never find out unless we do it. Like you said,
yeah,
sometimes you have to fall and cry in the mud. Like sometimes it's just what's warranted
absolutely.
at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
And
no
so
judgment about that. You might
no,
sit and cry in the mud one day, the next day you might get up and charge through. For me,
right.
it's not about it. It doesn't really matter. It's like just feel it and have the experience and yeah, grow from that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that's the point of this podcast, like more women to hear other
Yeah.
women's stories because, you and I would have never crossed each other on the streets. And like
No,
you probably
no,
won't be in southern Utah.
no.
And like maybe someday when my girls are bigger I will be in Ireland, which is a dream of
Yeah.
mine, that
Wow.
that the
It
all
must come.
the Celtic land is calling me, and that will most likely happen. But it's so wonderful that you and I have been able to meet each other and have these conversations.
Yes.
And I mean, I know
Yeah.
personally I've been fangirling over you for so long that I just like gush over you and I tell people about your courses and your work because women working with other women is so powerful, and sharing stories is so powerful. And like you said, we're storytellers. I mean, Sharon says it all the time too. We're storytellers. Like, we live through each other's stories. And if we hear one woman doing something, living on the land and caring for it, it inspires us to then be like, oh, I could do that then.
Yes.
You know, you weren't this master at agriculture or whatever to go live on the land. You know, like, you didn't have any formal training on how to live on the land.
Absolutely.
So it's a wonderful thing to have this space to
Yeah.
talk about and share stories. And I hope that I'm not keeping you from your chores. I think we're
No,
like an
you're all
hour.
right. The evening chores.
Your evening chores. You said you have some hens.
It's lovely, but that's, I mean, that was the beauty as well with, you know, I suppose COVID opened that door of, you know, the Zoom, because I would have never contemplated doing anything via Zoom before then. It just was alien to me. You know, and I'm not that old. It was like,
No.
don't know about this whole technology piece, but that was the beauty of then. It was suddenly, we could make connections across the world. Yeah, and that's amazing. And then, you know, there's other things when you mentioned Sharon, like, you know, Sharon I only met because she came here to walk the labyrinth and to interview me for that book, but you know, we're really good friends now. So it's we make those connections sort of like they sound random, but in another way they're not. You know, we're sort of on courses to meet these people in some format. So it's, yeah, it's just it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to be my first episode.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
She tells me now as we finish up, no pressure. So,
well, I would say my friend Ruby was our first episode. She's the one that was like, let's put out your very first podcast as soon as you have the idea, so you can't go back on it.
Good for you.
Yeah. So I hope that I can have you again on, you know, again later on down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you have any other courses that are coming out for Tranquil Pass or anything coming up?
Well, there's just the two now that are coming up in terms of course wise is the Spirit of Animal is a course that I do. It's in person here, so a group will come here, and that's sharing the animals' wisdom and the work that I do with animals. And then we have the Soul's Journey as well again in October, November. And then I do my individual animal work continuously throughout the year, and they all went online as well in COVID, which is interesting. It works really well. And then I do my individual sessions as well.
Cool. Yeah, I'll put your website and your Instagram and stuff. Those are the best places to reach you.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, I'll be sending all the people to you anyways. I'm always plugging you somewhere.
All the peoples.
All the people. All the women.
Brittany sent me. It'll be the tagline. Brittany
just
sent
open
me.
your email. Just put in the subject, Brittany sent me.
Brittany sent me.
I'll stick all your information on this podcast, and I'm so
beautiful. Thank you
for coming on and to, you know, spending your
bother at all. No, it's lovely, and we'll certainly do it again because we can talk about such a diverse range of things.
Oh yeah, we didn't even get into it.
No, we didn't.
We had no time limit. I'm sure we would have gone deeper.
We would have gone intergalactic.
Yes, next time.
Can be lovely, lovely, lovely to see you, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, give your pup some love. I love your new pup. He's so cute.
Yeah, my parents here snoring behind me. So the older girl is here. I don't know, you might not hear her snoring, but anyway, she's snoring there.
Oh,
I don't know where the others are.
I love seeing them on your page. They're so sweet. They just have like the most beautiful energy ever. Just love them to pieces.
Big energy. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Okay, well, I won't keep you from your evening chores.
You're all right. Listen, thank you.
Yes,
take care.
You. All right,
See you soon. Cheerio. Bye-bye.